Peace, fam. Today we're going to talk about how a keto intake, or what people call a diet, which is a very low carb regimen, how it can help things like hypertension, obesity specifically, and things also like ED and some other issues. Now, many people know the keto intake as a very, very low carb regimen that clears the body of stored glucose. But I thought I'd give it a little more clarity by addressing some questions I've been getting regarding this and how men with some of these issues can greatly benefit from it. Now, some of the language can be confusing if you're not familiar with medical terminology, so I'm going to be as simple as I can, which should not be hard since I have to transform a lot of what I read into simple language so I can get it myself. First, let me show you something you need to see so you can understand from the beginning why carbs are not necessary in large amounts. And by large amounts, I mean 50 to 80 grams of carbs is basically all you need to power your body, even if you're not in ketosis. Now, the only exceptions to this, barring other health issues, are sports like powerlifting, sprints, dual workouts during the day. And even those sports, if you go through the process of fat adaptation, you can program your body to eventually use fat as fuel during even those types of heavy endurance sports. And that's a process that's very complex, and most of us don't do those things, so we won't go into it. But I just thought I'd mention it. Okay, so we're looking at glucogenic amino acids. Now, glucogenic amino acid is an amino acid that can be converted into glucose through gluconeogenesis. This is in contrast to the ketogenic amino acids, which are converted into ketone bodies. All right, so what they're telling you here is that you have actually an array of amino acids that can be turned into glucose. All right, carbs basically. All right, and these are all of the amino acids that are glucogenic or glucogenic. Adenine, arginine, asparagine, aspartic acid, cysteine, glutamic acid, glutamine, glycine, histidine, methionine, proline, serine, threonine, valine. Okay. Now you have a few that are both glucogenic and ketogenic: phenylalanine, isoleucine, threonine, tryptophan, and tyrosine. Okay. Only leucine and lysine are not glucogenic. So you only have out of the 22 amino acid profile, you only have 2 that cannot be converted into glucose. So what does this mean? Let's say you're on a keto intake, okay, and you're eating only carbs. You're eating only lean proteins and fat, okay, very little carbs. If it proves to be too much for you and you don't have enough energy, you can actually just intake more protein, okay, because we know that most lean proteins or most full spectrum proteins have these amino acids in them. And your body will take from those amino acids what it needs to operate at its optimum level. Now, that doesn't mean that you'll feel good. But what this means for you, okay, if I can make it simple, is that you can actually eat below par or below the amount of carbs that you need to function efficiently. And what will happen is your body will actually take the amino acids from the protein that you're taking, and you have to up your protein intake, and make carbs. Now again, you might still feel a little sluggish until you become better fat adapted. But your body what you have to do is have to have the faith to understand that your body is doing its job and converting what it needs from those proteogenic or from those protein foods. It's converting what it needs to function, those amino acids, into glucose. Now, what is the advantage of this? The advantage is this. The body is not going to take amino acids from protein and convert them to excess carbs to store fat. Okay? It's too smart for that. If it's in a deficit of carbs, it's going to take only what it needs from these amino acids, form the glucose that it needs to feed whatever functions require the carbohydrate intake. So let's just say you work out too heavy or you do too much thinking for that day, because as I explained in previous videos, The brain is only 11% of the body, takes up 23% of the body's fuel energy source. Okay, our brains are very, very, very powerful, and they require a lot of energy, the most of any being on the planet. Okay, you can go back in my archives and see the video that I did on that. But what your body will do is it will take these amino acids and convert them into glucose to feed itself if there's a deficiency that is starting to rob the body of any type of essential operation or any essential function. All right, but it will not produce excess. Why would the body take these in an emergency situation and convert these into excess fat when if your diet is already, or your intake is already sufficient enough in supply of fats, it would not take these and then convert them into glucose, produce more insulin to shuttle these into fat cells. Okay, and the production, or rather the conversion of these amino acids into glucose does not have to happen with an insulin spike. Okay, and we know that insulin is what pushes excess glucose into fat cells. Okay, but here you get a transformation of amino acids into glucose without the extra insulin spike to then signal a shuttling of excess food storage into fat cells. Okay, I hope I made that clear. I know it may seem a little confusing, but if you go over it a few times, you'll understand. And if you have just a small grasp of how macronutrients function, you'll easily get that. All right. So we know carbs are not as necessary for melanated people as protein is, and protein can be used in higher amounts than the standard 20 to 25% recommended for the traditional keto intake that's used for non-melanated people. Now, why do I say this? Why am I going here? All right, stick with me, open your mind a little bit. Let's go with the 20% of protein, or the standard 20% of protein that is basically recommended for a keto intake. This amount of protein is basically used for bodily processes, blood, enzymes, muscle building or maintenance, among a few other things. Now let's say 20% of your calories from protein is a precise number. Well, for a non-melanated person, 20%, if exact, would then fuel their cellular processes, their body, their muscles, all in a maintenance balance. So it would balance them out. Everything would be maintained under that 20%. But melanin is a full uniform that covers the whole body of the melanated being. And guess what's used to produce melanin? Right, protein. The amino acid tyrosine is the primary macro which is used in synthesizing melanin in the skin. Now, it's heavily involved in the pigmentation of dark-skinned people, and it would stand to reason that dark-skinned people need more of it than people without melanin, or eumelanin, as they technically call it. Calcium also heavily regulates how much tyrosine is converted to melanin, so it is another macro that is unique in its need to the melanated body. This is why you should not use calcium sources from rocks, by the way. Our bodies are structured for more than average calcium intake, and if you're using a rock as a building block instead of plant calcium sources, you're hurting your body. Copper is another mineral unique to the need for melanin production. Okay, so there are variations here that may not be expressly noted, but you have to understand from your body of work and your body of study how these things come into application. Now that we know some details about keto and its unique application, let's get back to my point. People think keto was about eating fat to encourage fat loss, but what it is about stopping the insulin machinery from going into storage mode and turning on the ketogenesis machinery to mobilize and burn the existing fat stores for energy. Once you master these switches, you can do some amazing things. I bear witness to that. Now, this is not new, fam. I was a personal trainer for 10 years, and being involved in the fitness game, I often read articles written by a lot of um, fitness gurus back in the day. And there was a fitness guru, a man by the name of Dan Duchaine, back in the mid to late 90s, who was one of the first to talk about a ketogenic intake in the public forum. Now, he called it something different. It was the Body Opus Plan, where he talks about getting 70% of your calories, or 70% of your calories, from fat and 30% from protein. Now, he didn't think carbs were necessary at all in any amount. And he even talked about getting up at 4 a.m. to take aminos and then going back to sleep to preserve muscle mass while on his particular keto regimen. Then on the weekend, one would carb up all day and flood the muscles with glucose for like a steroid effect. Now, this is somewhat true, but nowhere near the effect of actually using steroids, which was the audience he was talking to at the time. That's the reason that it didn't get a lot of traction, because he was talking to an audience of people who were looking for alternatives to steroids, but these things that they tried came nowhere close. So again, that keto, again, he called it the Body Opus Plan, but that keto formula didn't take traction back then in the late 90s. When you're in ketosis, the body is basically either using fat or burning it, one of the two. And if you keep it in a deficit, it will be in a constant fat burning mode. And this includes fat, and this is important, this includes fat in arteries from plaque buildup and nerve damage from fatty deposits around nerves, which is something they don't tell you about. Fat can cause nerve damage in a condition called Madelung's disease. Now, they characterize Madelung's disease as a rare disorder, but in theory, for me, this is just my theory, I think it's probably more underdiagnosed than it is rare. Okay, there's no connection because if it's rare, it's probably something that's not put into the manuals of your average doctor's office. All right, and they clearly set out, or they clearly lay out, that it is related to metabolic abnormalities and other diseases associated with Madelung's disease. So it says sometimes there are metabolic abnormalities and other diseases associated with Madelung's disease. These may include diabetes mellitus, hypertension, and liver disease. So that's a wide range of potential causes for these things, for these fatty deposits that cause nerve damage. And if you remember my video about sexual health, we know that nerve damage is a major cause of ED. Okay. Right. So the exact cause of Madelung's disease is not known. The body's inability to properly metabolize fat indicates that it may be an endocrine disorder. Okay. So we know that the body can become unable to properly metabolize fat if the machinery is not acting right. If the fat is being stored, if the insulin is oversensitive, or if it's not functioning properly, well, then you by default have a inability to metabolize fat. All right, and here we see how they talk about the peripheral neuropathy or neuropathy or impaired function of the nerves in the arms and legs often accompanies Madelung's disease, especially as the affected person grows older. Okay, so we can definitely see that there is a relationship between fatty deposits, too much fat accumulation, and nerve damage. And we see the common denominator with the diabetes. And also a lot of us melanated people suffer from hypertension. Okay, and liver disease can basically be categorized as not just something like cirrhosis, but it could also be a liver that has itself developed too many fatty deposits and it cannot properly um, moderate the glucose production or regulate the glucose production in the body. Okay, so we have a lot of things connected to fat regulation in the body, glucose metabolism in the body. So of course you can see how then a ketogenic intake is very, very important, or can be very, very important in fighting many of the underlying causes for some health issues that relate to diabetes, hypertension, blood issues, etc. Many of the problems that stem from hypertension and diabetes can be mediated by just regulating the body's fat burning mechanism, and to stop it from storing fat and to make it burn and use fat as a fuel source. It's really basic, simple math, but sometimes we need to see the science behind it, to have the faith in it, and to have the conviction to go through with it, and understand that it will work if we put the effort into it and properly apply ourselves. Okay, so that has been this video for this session. Till next time. If you learned from this video, help support the study and time to bring this knowledge to our community. It does take time and effort to be concise and as accurate as possible so that we can stay abreast of important health information and techniques. Please visit the site and follow these links.